Hey guys, tonight we board a creaky Victorian train as dusk settles over the smoky city. You step up onto the wooden platform, boots tapping faintly, the cold iron of the handrails rough beneath your fingers. A whistle wails in the distance, low and mournful, as you slide into the soot-smudged life of a long-distance train conductor. The wheels clatter, steady and hypnotic, a lullaby of metal and motion. The air is thick with the scent of coal dust, hot oil, and damp wool. You can almost taste it, a gritty mixture that sticks to your tongue and nestles into your collar. You glance around the dim corridor of the passenger car, noting the gas lamps swaying slightly overhead, their warm flicker softening the cracked leather seats. But before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your location and your local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward through the narrow passage, brushing past sleepy travelers wrapped in woolen scarves. Your uniform cap itches slightly, and the brass buttons on your coat clink as you walk. There's no real bed waiting for you tonight, no warm hearth. Just the rhythmic sway of the train and the occasional draft slipping through imperfectly sealed windows. Historians still argue whether Victorian train conductors preferred their itinerant life to the relative stability of city jobs. But tonight, you have no choice but to embrace the motion. Your shift has begun. You settle into your post, occasionally pulling the cord that sends a signal to the engineer. You'll do this 100 times tonight, 1,000 more before you retire. But now, the train groans into its long journey, a serpentine shadow winding through the English countryside. You pass through second-class compartments, where the air smells faintly of stewed cabbage and wet boots. Here, a gentleman snores with his mouth open, while a child clutches a ragged doll, her head lolling gently with the rhythm of the tracks. The world outside your window is a blur of hedgerows and distant lamps. A fog drapes the fields like a sleeping cat, soft and unmoving. And through it all, you walk, check tickets, and stifle yawns. Your feet ache, your eyes burn, and still you carry on. Victorian train conductors, you've heard, were masters of a peculiar skill, sleeping while standing, if only for a precious few seconds. The movement of the train becomes a lullaby that, paradoxically, both soothes and demands vigilance. You close your eyes briefly just to rest them, but the clanging of the coupling rods snaps you awake. You're not supposed to sleep on duty. It's strictly forbidden. Yet everyone does, secretly, quietly. They lean against wooden panels, heads tipped just so, balancing on the edge of rest. A dangerous game, but a necessary one. There's an old superstition whispered among the more superstitious conductors that if you fall asleep while gripping the brass handle of the door, the spirits of the tracks will keep you upright. You've heard the stories, probably invented over one too many teas laced with a suspicious amount of sugar. But tonight, your tired hand lingers near that handle, just in case. The train jolts softly as it crosses a series of points. Your balance shifts automatically, your boots knowing the rhythm better than your mind. Victorian railways were notorious for their relentless schedules. Historians still argue whether the timetables were more cruel to the trains or the people who ran them. Every second mattered, but what mattered less was whether the crew ever really rested. You pass by the baggage compartment, the scent of damp canvas and oiled leather, a brief comfort. There's a porter napping on a folded trunk, mouth agape, snoring faintly beneath a bowler hat that slid over his eyes. You let him be. Everyone steals moments where they can. You remember the tales of old Thomas Pickett, a legendary conductor who once claimed he could sleep for precisely 3 minutes at a time between each station without missing a single duty. Of course, no one can confirm whether Thomas actually existed or whether he was just the kind of story new hires were told to keep them both amused and terrified. The night grows colder. You tug your coat tighter, breath fogging briefly as you pass a particularly drafty door. Outside, the moon glows weakly, barely lighting the landscape as your iron serpent hurtles through the dark. You pass by third class now, the wooden benches unforgiving, the passengers slumped and swaying. Here, sleep is not a luxury, it's a small rebellion against the discomfort. A woman cradles a bundle that might be a baby or a satchel of bread. You're too polite, or perhaps too weary to check. Sleep on a moving train is a strange thing. It comes in layers like poorly stacked luggage. Light sleep, jolted by every whistle and brake. Deeper sleep, when the body accepts the rocking as its own heartbeat. And then the perilous sleep, the one you've been warned about. The sleep so deep that it can take you past your station, past your duty, past safety itself. You snap awake as the bell clangs near the engineer's cab. It's nothing urgent, just a routine check. Still, your heart thuds briefly before settling back into its tired rhythm. As you trudge back toward your post, you pass by the baggage cart where clerks sort letters by lamplight, their fingers flying through stacks of envelopes. One of them offers you a sardonic grin, half-lidded with exhaustion. "Only 4 hours to London," he mutters, and you both know 4 hours can feel like a lifetime. Historians still argue whether the relentless drive of the railway age was a mark of progress or merely a shift in how people tolerated exhaustion. You suspect it's both. You steal a glance at your pocket watch. It's late, but not late enough. The journey continues. The train lurches gently as you press forward, your boots clacking rhythmically on the wooden floorboards that hum beneath you. The passenger cars sway side to side, a sleepy cradle that both soothes and unsettles. Tonight, your sleeping quarters are nothing more than a moving box, wobbling along the endless rails. Victorian trains weren't designed with crew comfort in mind. They were built for speed, for industry, for the relentless ticking of synchronized clocks. Historians still argue whether sleeping arrangements for conductors were a practical afterthought or a quiet form of occupational punishment. You tend to suspect the latter. You reach your assigned bunk, if you can call it that. It's wedged behind a stack of luggage, barely wide enough to lie flat. The mattress is stuffed with straw, coarse and crinkling beneath your palm as you press it. It smells faintly of mildew and of old tobacco. Above you, a small oil lamp swings on a brass hook, the flame trembling with every bump in the tracks. You hope it won't drip on you. It probably will. You shrug off your coat, fold it carefully, and lay it beneath your head for extra height. Pillows, apparently, are for the upper classes. You, a humble conductor, make do with what you have. There's a tiny window by your bunk, but it's streaked with soot and condensation. Through the smudged glass, you can just make out the passing shadows of trees and distant cottages, flickering like half-formed dreams. Somewhere out there, people are sleeping in proper beds, wrapped in warm quilts, their rooms silent and still. You, on the other hand, will be lulled to sleep by the clatter of wheels, the occasional sharp hiss of steam, and the persistent rattle of loose fittings that no one bothers to repair. It's oddly comforting, like the grumble of an old friend. The bedding creaks as you ease yourself down, shifting carefully to avoid an ancient spring that threatens to jab your ribs. Victorian train bunks were never intended to be luxurious. They were survival spaces, temporary, improvised. Some conductors even preferred to string hammocks across storage areas, claiming the gentle sway made for better sleep. Others would curl beneath benches or tuck themselves into empty freight compartments, insulated by sacks of grain. You'd heard tales of one ingenious conductor who fashioned a sleeping nest inside a stack of bundled newspapers, carefully hollowing out the center to create a surprisingly snug cocoon. Historians still argue whether this was a true event or simply one of the many stories passed between weary railwaymen to keep their spirits up. You wiggle slightly to find a comfortable position. The lamp above you swings with a groan, and you quickly decide that the soft squeak it makes every few seconds will either drive you mad or lull you into a trance. No middle ground. The air is cool against your face, but your body is cocooned in the itchy embrace of a wool blanket. You know this train car well. You know which floorboard creaks when you shift your weight. You know which window rattles when the train rounds a particular bend. These details, trivial by day, become anchors in the night, a map of familiarity when sleep is scarce. It's astonishing what the mind accepts as normal after weeks, months, years of nights like this. You find comfort in the wobble, in the rhythmic sway that might send an ordinary traveler into queasy discomfort. Your eyelids droop, but the train jolts sharply as it crosses an uneven stretch of track, bouncing you lightly on the straw mattress. You let out a soft grunt, adjusting your position. You're no stranger to these moments. There's a story among the conductors about a man who claimed he could balance a tin mug of tea on his chest while he slept, never spilling a drop despite the train's motion. Some say he was a master of railway napping. Others, more realistically, suggest he simply drank very little tea. You smirk to yourself, imagining the absurdity. Victorian trains had peculiar design quirks, among them hanging oil lamps that would sometimes leak if they swung too vigorously. More than one conductor awoke with an unpleasant surprise, a small, warm drip landing right on their nose. It was considered both an annoyance and a superstition. Some said it meant you would be granted an extra day's rest the following week. Historians still argue whether such oil blessings ever affected shift assignments, but the story persists, and tonight you find yourself glancing at the lamp with mild suspicion. Your hand absently traces the brass trim along the edge of the bunk as you listen to the layers of sound surrounding you, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels, the occasional distant whistle, the murmur of sleeping passengers beyond the thin walls. The train hums like a lullaby in motion, and despite your best efforts to stay alert, your breathing slows. Just as you start to drift, the brakes hiss and jolt the car with a shudder. Your shoulder bumps the wooden panel behind you. With a groan, you sit up and rub your neck. This is the dance. Doze, jolt awake. Doze again, perhaps a little deeper. Victorian train conductors were known for this half-sleep existence. The rolling bunk rooms, improvised as they were, became second homes. Some even carried small personal touches, a folded photo, a book of railway timetables with careful notes scribbled in the margins, or a lucky trinket, a coin, a feather, or a pocket watch with a cracked face. Your own lucky charm dangles from a leather cord around your wrist, a battered brass whistle, long since retired from official use. You finger it absently, its familiar weight grounding you as your breathing begins to soften again. You lie back down, listening to the gentle groan of the timber as the train stretches into the night. Historians still argue whether these makeshift bunks were truly adequate, but you've grown used to their peculiar comfort. In fact, you might even prefer them to the motionless beds that await beyond this railway life. The oil lamp sways, its soft creak now as familiar as a heartbeat. You close your eyes. You stir as the train hits another rough patch, the clatter of the wheels briefly intensifying, then softening once more as the iron serpent regains its steady rhythm. You rub your eyes, the faint imprint of the straw mattress crisscrossed on your cheek, and sit up slowly, body swaying instinctively with the movement of the car. There's no luxury of 8 uninterrupted hours here. Sleep on the rails comes in shifts, tight, regimented rotations that would break most men. You, like all Victorian train conductors, have mastered the art of fractured rest. The shift system is brutal, almost surgical in its precision. 4 hours on, 2 hours off. 3 hours on, 1 hour off.
a rotation so strict that if you miss your slot, you fall behind like a forgotten parcel on the platform. Historians still argue whether these rigid shifts were devised for safety or simply to wring every ounce of labor from the crew. You glance at your pocket watch, the tiny second hand trembling as if shivering from the cold. Time is both your master and your measuring stick. You know exactly how many minutes you have to slip into a light doze before you must rise again to check the couplings, signal the next stop, or assist a bleary-eyed passenger fumbling with luggage in the dark. In this world, sleep is not a block. It's a series of scattered fragments, like the shattered pieces of a dropped teacup. The trick, you've learned, is to gather as many of those pieces as you can and somehow believe they form a whole. The bunk's coarse blanket clings to your legs as you slide off, boots thumping softly against the wooden floor. You shuffle toward the end of the carriage, where a kettle rattles lazily over a small coal stove. The kettle's thin whistle pierces the low hum of the train. You make yourself a cup of scalding tea, more for ritual than comfort. The bitter taste stings your tongue awake. Some conductors favor stronger pick-me-ups. You've heard of laudanum drops slipped into lukewarm tea, a few precious moments of oblivion bought at the cost of clarity. Others swear by pocket flasks of rum, though the supervisors, sharp-eyed and suspicious, officially forbid it. Historians still argue whether the railway companies genuinely cared about safety or simply didn't want the paperwork that came with accidents. You sip your tea carefully, leaning against the wooden panel as the train sways around a gentle curve. Your body hums with fatigue, yet the rhythm of the wheels keep you tethered. Shift changes happen with the precision of a watchmaker. Your replacement conductor appears, eyes half-lidded, hair rumpled from his own brief nap. He nods in that quiet, knowing way, a universal exchange among the perpetually tired. You hand over the brass signaling cord and retreat to your bunk again, knowing the clock will summon you soon enough. There's a whispered belief among the crew that missing your shift even once brands you forever as unreliable. Redemption is difficult. Stories circulate about one unfortunate man who overslept a station and was relegated to loading mailbags for the rest of his career. You've never confirmed whether this punishment was real or a cautionary fable meant to keep you trembling awake. You ease yourself back onto the straw-filled mattress, the springs protesting with a tired groan. Your hand rests on your pocket watch, its tiny glass face catching the flicker of the nearby lamp. The Hans march on, indifferent to your weariness. The train's lullaby continues, the wheels clicking like a hypnotist's metronome. And you trudge forward, surrendering to the next stretch of sleepless duty. You check the brass chain that secures your pocket watch, feeling the familiar tug as you lift the cool, worn piece from your coat. Its face is slightly scratched, its second hand trembles faintly with each bump in the track, but it remains loyal, counting the minutes that drip like thick molasses through your shift. Tonight, you aren't just tracking station arrivals, you're tracking your naps. Victorian train conductors, you know, had an odd, almost reverent relationship with their pocket watches. They weren't just timekeepers, they were tiny sleep guardians. Conductors measured their rest in minutes, not hours, and some became so precise they could nap in what they called pocket watch intervals, 5, 7, 11-minute bursts between scheduled duties. Historians still argue whether these micro-napping strategies were developed through strict habit or born from sheer desperation. Perhaps it was both. You glance at your watch again. 11 minutes before your next break check. Enough time, you decide, to steal a quick nap if you're careful. You wedge yourself into a quiet alcove behind a stack of mail sacks. The heavy scent of damp canvas and sealing wax wraps around you like an old coat. You cradle the pocket watch in your palm, pressing it gently to your chest
as if its steady ticking could sync with your heartbeat. Victorian conductors believed their watches could almost guide them to wakefulness, a soft, measured pulse that kept them tethered to duty, even as their bodies sagged into fatigue. You close your eyes. The train rocks, a motion so deeply familiar that your muscles loosen without permission. Your breathing slows, stretching like lazy taffy, and you drift toward that narrow edge of rest where the clack of the wheels fades into a distant metronome. But just as you begin to settle, your body jerks lightly, your internal clock pulling you back before you tip too far. You glance at the watch. 10 minutes have passed. A small victory. The trick, you've learned, is not to trust the schedule alone. Conductors like you keep a second clock, a mental one, woven into the tempo of the train. A veteran conductor could tell, without checking, when it was time to move, when the next stop approached, when the engineer would signal for assistance. Some called it intuition, others called it survival. You pass by the crew's brake corner, where another conductor sits with his feet propped on a battered trunk, balancing a tin cup of coffee dangerously close to his knee. He tips his cap in your direction, but doesn't bother with conversation. Words are rationed at this hour, just like rest. The tin clock on the wall above him ticks sluggishly, its hands slightly misaligned, a relic from an earlier train generation. It's off by nearly 7 minutes, but no one bothers to fix it. Your pocket watch is your true compass. There's a rumor among conductors, told only to those who have spent years on the rails, that some watches remember their owners, even after being sold or passed down. A watch that belonged to a great napper, they say, will gently coax its next owner into perfect microsleeps. You've never been superstitious, but the idea clings to you like the smell of coal. You move on, stepping lightly past sleeping passengers, their faces slack with exhaustion, their breaths shallow and rhythmic. The lamps overhead cast long, trembling shadows across the wooden panels, their soft glow both comforting and eerie. The train's pulse continues, click-clack, click-clack, a heartbeat you can't quite escape. Victorian train conductors carried another tool of the trade, the station card. It listed each stop, its expected arrival, and the precise whistle signals required at each approach. Some would scribble nap notes in the margins, personal reminders like safe nap between Foxford and Hartwell. Historians still argue whether these nap logs were officially tolerated or quietly ignored by supervisors who understood that a conductor's endurance sometimes depended on these precarious slivers of sleep. You remember hearing about old Gregory, a conductor known for timing his naps so well that he once slept through an entire freight car derailment, waking just in time to step calmly off the wreckage and resume his duties on the next train. Whether this was history or convenient fiction remains deliciously unclear. Your own station card is dog-eared and softened by use. The ink smudges tell their own story. 1,000 quick glances, 100 subtle calculations to carve out rest in the relentless schedule. You reach for your pocket watch again, its brass case slightly warm from your touch. Another nap window approaches, just under 10 minutes as you glide toward the next junction. It's risky, but manageable. You slide onto a wooden bench in an unused compartment, tucking your legs beneath you, your back pressed against a cool window pane. The sway of the train is particularly gentle here, almost like being rocked in a cradle. You count your breaths. In, out, in, out. The soft creak of the oil lamps, the faint rustle of sleeping passengers, the distant hiss of steam. All the lullabies you've come to trust. And just as your breathing slows and your muscles melt into the bench, your body shudders itself awake, like a marionette pulled by invisible strings. You glance at the watch. 9 minutes, 30 seconds. Not bad. You rise,
stretching briefly, and make your way toward the baggage car, your boots scuffing softly on the floorboards. The night is long, but you've claimed another pocket of rest, another fragment to patch together your worn-out reserves. Victorian train conductors, you realize, are masters of borrowed time. Borrowed minutes, borrowed naps, borrowed moments of stillness snatched from the jaws of motion. Historians still argue whether the railway's obsession with punctuality transformed conductors into living extensions of the clock, their own lives ticking in strict synchrony with the machines they served. You suspect it did. You step into the cold corridor, the night pressing against the windows like a waiting hand. The journey continues. You step into the corridor where the cold curls in, sharp and damp, sneaking through every imperfect seam in the woodwork. Victorian train cars are notoriously drafty at this hour, especially when the fog settles thick against the glass, muffling the world outside. You pull your coat tighter around you, the brass buttons cool against your fingers, and make your way toward the crew's tiny galley, where a battered kettle always seems to be on the brink of boiling. The smell of overstewed tea clings to the air, mingling with the rough tang of coal dust. Tonight you reach for something a little stronger. On the top shelf, tucked behind a cracked mug, you find it. A small, suspiciously dented tin marked only with a crooked label, for wakefulness. The crew call it coffee. You suspect it's a loose interpretation. You scoop a generous spoonful into your mug, add a splash of hot water from the kettle, and brace yourself. The first sip is like a slap to the tongue, burnt, bitter, with the faintest whisper of something that might once have been chicory. But it does the trick. It tightens your nerves, sharpens your fading edges. You've heard stories of other conductors who favor even stranger concoctions. Laudanum, of course, but also curious mixtures of tea and cod liver oil, or homemade tonics laced with what they called a nip of the surgeon's helper. Historians still argue whether railway management turned a blind eye to such midnight remedies, or whether they were simply too tired to care. You lean against the cupboard, staring at the brass clock that ticks stubbornly above the galley door. Your next shift ticks closer. You have just enough time for a few more sips. The nights grow cold on the Victorian rails, but the real chill seeps in from within, a gnawing weariness that no scarf or tonic can fully fend off. You remember the old trick, warming your boots near the kettle to steal a little comfort for your toes. You position them just close enough to soften the leather, but far enough to avoid melting the sole. A delicate science. Your eyes drift briefly to the frost-laced window, where the blurred silhouettes of telegraph poles flash by, like the slow beats of a steady drum. Their rhythm, like everything else, is stitched into your bones now. It's quiet, almost too quiet. The silence between stations on a foggy night has a peculiar weight to it. It's said that some conductors began to hallucinate in these long stretches, seeing ghostly shapes on the tracks, hearing phantom whistles in the distance. Some wrote them off as the tricks of an exhausted mind. Others swore they'd seen the pale figure of a woman in white, standing motionless by the sidings. You've never seen her, but you've heard the stories. Historians still argue whether such tales were born from isolation or perhaps from the deeply human need to fill the silence. You finish your gritty coffee, grimacing as you set the mug down with a soft clink. Out in the corridor, the train hisses and sighs like an old beast. You adjust your cap and continue on, the soles of your boots pressing into the familiar grooves worn into the floorboards by countless others who walked this same path. As you make your way past the sleeping compartments, you peek briefly into the third-class carriages. Passengers slump against each other, their faces slack with sleep, their heads bobbing slightly with the rhythm of the rails. A man's hat has tipped forward over his nose. A child clutches a tin toy soldier with chipped red paint. They will wake stiff, sore, and perhaps no more rested than you.
Victorian sleeping arrangements were, at best, a polite suggestion. The upper classes enjoyed cushioned compartments with drawn curtains and padded benches, but the common traveler endured wooden seats, thin blankets, and the persistent draft of cracked windows. You adjust your pace, stepping lightly to avoid rousing the passengers as you approach the end of the carriage. There, you pass the freight car, where a single lantern casts a warm puddle of light over stacks of crates and mailbags. An older conductor sits nearby, his boots crossed at the ankles, his head nodding forward in a slow, hypnotic dip. He startles awake as you approach, blinking blearily. 3 minutes, he mutters, voice thick with fatigue. 3 solid minutes I had that time. You grin softly, the private language of conductors. Victorian conductors prized these slivers of rest like currency. The stories you hear, some proven, some probable, some surely embellished, speak of men who could sleep for mere moments and rise with precision, as if pulled awake by invisible strings. One old tale lingers in your mind, the story of a conductor who claimed to time his nap so perfectly he once awoke a heartbeat before the next scheduled station call, without the aid of a clock or companion. Whether this was sheer habit or railway magic remains a delicious mystery. Historians still argue whether such degree of time sense was learned or inherited, whether it was skill or superstition. You lean briefly against the cool wood of the carriage wall, listening to the deep pulse of the engine, the soft hiss of steam bleeding from distant valves. You're keenly aware of how the cold wraps around your ankles, biting despite your heavy socks. The midnight chill, especially when the train barrels through open countryside, is not to be underestimated. Conductors have their own rituals for chasing the cold away. Extra layers of wool, a swig of warming tonic, or simply keeping in constant motion. You shift from foot to foot, trying not to let the creeping numbness take hold. Through it all, the train moves forward, an endless serpent gliding along twin silver rails. You check your pocket watch again. Another shift approaches. Another nap window will soon come. You tuck the watch back into its brass chain, the familiar weight settling against your chest. And you trudge on, shoulders bowed, chasing the next sliver of sleep.
You make your way back toward the crew compartment, the soft groan of the train's joints echoing around you like an old man's muttered complaints. The car sways beneath your boots, a motion you've long since learned to ride like a second skin. You're thinking of them now, the so-called dreamless class of conductors. Not a formal designation, of course, just a quiet badge among railwaymen. The dreamless were the ones who, over time, claimed they simply stopped dreaming. No visions, no flickers of thought, just blackness when they slept. A blank page. Some said it was a defense mechanism, that the body simply couldn't afford to waste precious energy on spinning up a dream when every second of rest mattered. Others whispered it was the price of too many years rocked into partial oblivion by the relentless rattle of the tracks. Historians still argue whether this was physiologically possible or simply one of the many legends the railway birthed to comfort the endlessly exhausted. You reach your bunk again, slipping into the straw-stuffed mattress as the oil lamp above you swings with its now familiar squeak. You pull the itchy wool blanket over your shoulders and let the vibrations of the train nestle into your bones. As you begin to drift, you wonder, do you still dream? You try to summon the last one you can remember, something about a red scarf and a station with too many clocks. But the details fray and dissolve like smoke. Perhaps you're joining the dreamless too. There's a certain pride among that group. They boast of sleeping in clean, pure darkness. They claim it's restful, that it makes waking easier, that they rise as though rebooted, rather than dragged up through layers of strange images and distant bells.
One old conductor, named Ellis, was famous for it. He'd doze for exactly 7 minutes at a time and wake refreshed, insisting he'd seen nothing in his mind's eye. No faces, no shapes. His fellow conductors called him the blank ledger, a man who logged hours of rest but never scribbled in the margins. Ellis claimed it made him sharper, that without dreams, he was never caught in that foggy space between sleep and duty. But others, especially those newer to the rails, found the idea unsettling. The absence of dreams suggested something was missing, as if the railway slowly scraped away the layers that made you human. Historians still argue whether prolonged micronapping actually suppresses dreaming, or if it simply scatters dreams into fragments too brief to catch. You roll onto your side, pressing your cheek against the rough pillow you fashioned from your folded coat. The metal of your pocket watch cools your palm as you trace its edge. The dreamless class is an odd fraternity, but there's no application, no initiation. You just wake up one day and realize you don't remember the last time your mind wandered while you slept. You pass through third-class compartments again during your rounds, noting how deeply the passengers sleep, despite the jolts and squeals of the iron wheels. A child murmurs in her dreams, clutching a ragged cloth doll, her face slack with peaceful exhaustion. You envy her briefly. It's always the same on these long night runs. There are those who dream, those who fight to stay awake, and those, like you, begin to glide somewhere in between. You meet another conductor near the mail car, a wiry man named Sykes, who's known to take 3-minute naps perched on the edge of a crate without ever toppling over. "Don't dream anymore," he says to you as he sips from his battered tin cup. "Stopped about 5 years in. Now it's just lights out." He shrugs, as if to say, it doesn't matter. But it does, doesn't it? Even if you can't quite say why. Some conductors say the dreams get stored somewhere else, like unsorted mail in a forgotten bag, waiting to catch up with you all at once when you finally leave the rails for good. Others say the train takes them from you, trading your dreams for the rhythm of the track. You lean against the wall as the train rounds a gentle curve, the sway comforting, the lantern above swaying in slow agreement. The sounds around you form a symphony now, the measured clack of the wheels, the distant thump of mailbags shifting, the occasional creak of aging timber. You listen not as a conductor, but as someone folded into the machinery itself. Historians still argue whether this state of permanent half-sleep was a unique product of railway life, or simply an extreme version of what all laborers in the Victorian age endured. Perhaps they're all variations of the same weariness, just conducted along different tracks. You pass by the storage compartment, where a small, thin mattress is wedged between crates. Some say this was once the resting place of a particularly skilled dreamless conductor, who slept so precisely he could wake moments before the station bell, without fail, without alarm. There's a faint pencil marking on the wood above the mattress. 10 minutes to Ashby. A quiet reminder, or maybe a badge of pride. You run your fingers along the grooves in the timber, worn smooth by decades of weary hands. You realize you've come to prefer these small, quiet places on the train. The nooks between cargo, the forgotten benches, the shadows near the oil lamps. They feel more real than the plush cabins and brass fittings meant to impress the passengers. This is where the real railway life unfolds, in the quiet, in the cold, in the corners where the dreamless curl up and measure their rest, in the soft ticks of a pocket watch. You check yours again. Another brief window, opens soon. You turn back toward your bunk, steps steady, shoulders relaxed. The journey continues.
You step carefully over a loose floorboard, the one you always avoid because it snaps just loudly enough to wake the lightest sleeper in the next carriage. Your body now moves on instinct, avoiding, adjusting, remembering, without conscious effort. The train has taught you its secrets. You've been thinking about the dreamless conductors for hours now, perhaps because you're slowly becoming one yourself. There's a particular story that comes to mind, a tale passed around among night shift crews like an old, half-folded timetable. It's about a man named Wilkins, a conductor who supposedly conquered the very need for sleep altogether. Wilkins would catnap for 1 or 2 minutes at a time, standing upright, his hand resting lightly on a brass door handle for balance. Some said his naps were so brief he never even fully closed his eyes. Others claimed he had trained himself to blink longer, stacking his blinks like bricks to build a wall of rest. Historians still argue whether Wilkins ever existed or if he was simply a mythical figure born from collective fatigue. Either way, his legend lingers. You smile faintly, amused at the notion. Even you, seasoned as you are, have not mastered the art of standing naps, but you're getting close. You find your way back to your usual alcove, a narrow wedge between 2 supply crates near the rear of the freight car. It smells faintly of oil, damp rope, and old onions. It is, despite these details, one of the warmest spots on the train. You sit, knees tucked to your chest, and gently set your pocket watch beside you, its steady tick louder in this tiny space. The rhythm of the train overlaps with the ticking until you can no longer tell which sound belongs to which. You close your eyes. Your breathing deepens, chest rising and falling in slow, deliberate waves. The train's lullaby, the soft clatter of wheels, the low groan of timber, the occasional distant call of a night bird beyond the window, all merges into a soothing hum. And just as you begin to fade, you catch yourself, reeling gently back from the edge. You've trained your body to recognize the dangerous tipping point, that moment when you risk sinking too deeply to respond to the next whistle or station call. You crack one eye open, glance at the pocket watch. 3 minutes, 24 seconds. Not bad. You rise again, joints quietly protesting, and move forward along the corridor, past the sleeping passengers. You take comfort in their obliviousness. They trust that you and the others like you will ensure the journey continues uninterrupted. The trust is oddly weightless now. It no longer feels like a burden. Perhaps that's what years on the rails will do. It will sand you down until your duties become as automatic as the turning wheels beneath your feet. Your next task awaits, checking the couplings between the cars. A routine job, but an essential one. Victorian couplings, those iron links that bind the cars together, were notorious for their unpredictability. On cold nights like this one, the metal contracts and shifts, and it's up to you to ensure the train stays intact. You step out briefly onto the narrow platform between cars, where the cold lashes your face with a sharpness that steals your breath. The wind whips at your coat, tugging at the brass buttons, slicing through the thin seams of your gloves. You steady yourself with one hand on the rail, leaning carefully over to inspect the coupling. The iron links glisten with a thin sheen of frost, but they hold firm. You tap them with a small wooden mallet, listening for the right note, a low, solid funk that tells you all is well. There's a whispered superstition among the crew that couplings talk to you if you know how to listen, that a wrong note can save your life. Historians still argue whether these auditory checks were genuinely reliable or just a comforting ritual passed down through generations.
You've come to trust them. Your gloves creak as you grip the rail, pulling yourself back inside, where the warmth wraps around you like a familiar scarf. You pass another conductor in the corridor, his eyes half-lidded, his steps slow and deliberate. You nod in passing, a quiet exchange of mutual understanding. "Wilkins?" he murmurs, almost to himself, as though the name has floated into his mind as well. You smirk softly. Even now, the legend weaves itself through these midnight halls. The rest of your shift glides by in that suspended rhythm, checking lamps, verifying station markers, counting freight crates. Your body moves, but your mind drifts. You wonder briefly what it would be like to sleep for a full 8 hours again, to wake in a warm bed, the floor steady beneath your feet. Would you even trust such stillness? Would the silence feel wrong, like a missing limb? Perhaps the train has etched itself too deeply into you now. Perhaps you are built for this. Fragmented rest, half dreams, and brass watches that whisper your schedule into your palm. The pocket watch feels heavier tonight, as if it carries not just time, but all the naps you've banked within its ticking heart. You return to your bunk for one last brief rest before the dawn approaches. The train hums its endless song, and you ease yourself down, coat folded beneath your head, blanket rough against your chin. You glance one last time at the watch. 2 minutes until the next station. Enough time for a tiny sliver of sleep. You close your eyes. The train rocks you gently. The journey continues.
You rouse yourself before the station whistle blows, long before the brakes hiss their warning. Your body knows the rhythm now. How many heartbeats fit between stops. How the sway changes as the train slows. How the distant clack of the rails stretches just slightly when you're nearing a platform. Victorian train conductors didn't wait for the official signals. They read the vibrations underfoot, the way a sailor reads the sea. Historians still argue whether these instincts were learned through relentless experience or whether some men simply became attuned, almost fused, to the iron beasts they served. You step lightly through the corridor, the edges of your vision still softened by lingering drowsiness. Your hands know the rails, the latches, the catch on the galley door that sticks if pulled too quickly. Your boots carry you to your next task, overseeing passenger disembarkation at this remote countryside station. A handful of weary travelers will shuffle down onto the cold platform, some clinging to valises, others clutching small paper-wrapped parcels as if they contain treasures. You pull your coat tighter against the creeping dawn chill. The station is barely more than a wooden shelter and the lamppost struggling against the fog. The guard's lantern sways as he steps forward, his breath curling in ghostly ribbons. You help a woman down from the third-class carriage. Her gloved hand trembles slightly in yours, not from fear, but from the sharp bite of the morning air. She nods her thanks and disappears into the gray mist. There's a calm in these small stations, a kind of quiet that the busy urban platforms can never replicate. Here the train is a rare visitor, not a constant roar. You climb back aboard, brushing soot from your sleeve, and the train shudders as it lurches forward, pulling away from the sleeping village. Back to the rhythm, back to the rolling cradle. The passengers settle again, some drifting back to uneasy sleep, others clutching their luggage like life preservers, eyes blinking slowly as the countryside unfurls beyond the window. You pass the galley, where Sykes, still clutching his dented cup, leans against the counter with his usual drowsy smirk. "You're getting good," he says without looking up. "You caught the 2-minute nap right before stop." You shrug, but you're quietly pleased. The 2-minute nap is a conductor's prize, a brief plunge into the soft velvet of rest, just enough to smooth the edges without risking the next duty.
Victorian railway companies were notorious for punishing those who missed their station duties, but they quietly revered the conductors who could stretch their bodies to the very edge without faltering. You think again of Wilkins, of Ellis, of the dreamless. You've begun to wonder if this is your path too. There's a quiet superstition, passed in muttered conversations near the freight car, that dreamless conductors live longer. They say those who dream on the rails burn out faster, their minds stretched thin by the constant pull between rest and vigilance. Historians still argue whether there's any truth to the belief, or if it's just another comforting story conductors tell themselves in the long, empty hours of the night. You pull your pocket watch from your coat, its brass surface cool and familiar in your palm. The chain catches the weak morning light as it swings gently between your fingers. The watch is your true companion on this journey. Not your fellow conductors, not even the passengers who come, go, not even the train itself. The watch knows your breath, your pace, your pulse. It holds the beats of your stolen naps. You tuck it safely back into your pocket, fingers brushing against the worn leather fob attached to its chain. The countryside flashes by, blurred green and gray beyond the soot-streaked windows. The fog is lifting, but the air inside the carriage still clings to the scent of coal smoke and damp wool. You make your rounds, checking couplings, tapping oil lamps to keep the flame steady, glancing at the station card pinned near the door. The next stop is over an hour away, a rare stretch that offers a conductor's greatest treasure, a long nap window. You pause briefly in the crew galley, where another conductor is scribbling in the margins of his station card, quietly calculating the minutes he can afford to rest before the next task calls. "What's your record?" you ask, half smiling. 4 minutes, he says, tapping the card with his pencil. "But I'm working on 5. You nod in quiet respect. Among conductors, the competitive currency isn't speed, wealth, or even seniority. It's mastery over sleep. Victorian railway companies were notorious for punishing those who missed their station duties, but they quietly revered the conductors who could stretch their bodies to the very edge without faltering. You head back to your bunk, careful to step over the familiar loose board. You settle into the rough wool blanket, the straw mattress creaking beneath you. Your breathing slows. You hear the train song again, the click of the rails, the soft rattle of the window latch, the low hum of distant conversations. And just as your muscles melt into the bed, just as the pocket watch's steady ticking begins to guide you toward rest, you feel yourself hovering, still aware, still slightly tethered. A conductor's sleep is never full surrender. You teeter on the edge, cradled by the motion, bound to the rhythm. The journey continues. The long stretch between stations is a conductor's rarest luxury. You feel it settle over you now, a kind of spacious silence, a pocket of time where duties briefly loosen their grip. Your body, trained to snatch rest like a fox steals chickens, welcomes the opportunity. You slip into your usual alcove behind the freight crates, the familiar dents in the wooden floor pressing against your back. The watch in your hand ticks gently, its rhythm almost indistinguishable from the soft pulse of the rails beneath you. You glance at the hands, nearly 40 minutes until the next required station preparation, practically a feast. Historians still argue whether these precious long stretches were intentionally built into the Victorian railway schedules to allow conductors some recovery, or if they were happy accidents in an otherwise relentless timetable. Either way, you've come to treasure them. Your eyes close, the train's swaying carriage coaxing your breathing into slow, steady tides. In this rare, unhurried nap, something strange happens. A flicker. A scrap of a dream. You see a red scarf fluttering near a station clock, a soundless bell swinging in an empty signal tower. But just as quickly as it appears, it dissolves. Your body yanks you awake with the same gentle alarm that has kept you punctual for years. You open your eyes, heart calm, breath even. The pocket watch glows softly in the dawn light. 29 minutes remain. You caught yourself well in time. You sit up, stretching your shoulders against the stiffness of the cramped space. Perhaps you are not fully one of the dreamless yet. You move through the carriages, making your rounds with practiced steps. You tighten oil lamp fittings, check that the mailbags haven't shifted dangerously, tap the couplings between the cars with your wooden mallet to listen for the right sound. A deep, steady note, neither too sharp nor too hollow. There's a story about a young conductor who missed the change in tone, a soft ping instead of the expected thunk, and lost half a mail car to a coupling failure. They say he never returned to the rails. Whether this story is railway gospel or whispered scare tactic remains, as always, uncertain. Historians still argue whether the training manuals of the time even mentioned this tapping practice, or if it was a purely oral tradition passed from one conductor's calloused hand to the next. You finish your checks and find Sykes again, perched near the galley, one boot pressed lazily against a crate. He raises his dented tin cup. "You get a dream this time?" You nod slowly. "A flash of one." He chuckles, sipping what must surely be the worst cup of coffee in Britain. "Careful, that's how they start coming back. Next thing you know, you'll be dreaming on 2-minute naps." He grins, but there's something faintly wistful behind it. You wonder if he misses dreaming, or if, like many conductors, he simply learned to live without them. You both fall into a quiet rhythm, the train carrying you forward with its steady clack, the lamps swinging softly above. In the far end of the freight car, someone has scrawled a simple phrase into the wood: "Rest in motion." The handwriting is old, smudged, nearly worn away by decades of swaying and settling dust, but the words remain. You touch the letters gently, your glove grazing the grooves. Rest in motion. It's what you have become. A traveler of half-sleeps, a keeper of the pocket watch, a conductor bound not to destinations, but to the art of finding slivers of rest among the relentless ticking. Your next scheduled duty calls you forward, a station preparation, lamp checks, passenger alerts. You step into the corridor, the cold brushing your cheeks, the familiar floorboards creaking beneath your boot. The fog outside has begun to lift, revealing a countryside painted in the soft gray of early morning. Sheep huddle near low stone walls. A distant church spire pierces the mist. You pull your pocket watch from your coat, its brass surface gleaming faintly in the pale light. Hands march on, precise, indifferent to your lingering fatigue. You pocket the watch, hands steady, boots scuffing quietly as you walk. The station comes into view, its squat brick building huddled under a sloping roof, smoke curling lazily from a chimney. Passengers stir in their seats, gathering their things with sluggish, half-asleep movements. The hum of anticipation, faint but growing, begins to stir the compartment. You step onto the platform as the train glides to a halt, greeting the station guard with a nod, your motions smooth, your face calm. It's all part of the rhythm now. The duty, the watch, the nap. The journey continues.
You step lightly along the platform, boots striking the stone with a hollow echo that fades quickly beneath the creak of unloading cargo. The morning mist clings stubbornly to the edges of the station, a thick gray shawl draped across the countryside. This station is small, more of a polite suggestion than a hub of commerce. The signboard leans a little to the left, its paint chipped by countless winters, its name half faded. A few passengers shuffle off, their collars raised against the morning chill, boots squelching on damp gravel. You help an elderly man with a battered suitcase down the step, his hand trembling in yours, his gratitude a soft, almost whispered thing. You nod, not expecting conversation at this hour. The platform is nearly empty when you make your final pass, checking that no straggling parcels remain. You glance at the pocket watch. The stop is brief, 4 minutes before the next scheduled departure. But you know better than to waste those 4 minutes. Victorian train conductors prided themselves on reclaiming these tiny windows. A quick lean against a luggage crate, a controlled tilt of the head, a breath that stretches longer than usual. These are the secret luxuries of the railway life. You slide into your habitual corner behind the mailbags, the scent of ink and sealing wax pressing softly against your senses. You close your eyes. This nap is razor thin, measured, planned, deliberate. Victorian train conductors called these half-blinks. You don't fall fully asleep. You just loosen your grip on the waking world for a few beats, like letting go of a taut rope for one breath before grasping it again. Historians still argue whether these micro-rests provided any measurable recovery or if they simply offered the illusion of resilience. Perhaps the illusion was all that mattered. Your body knows when to lift you back. The subtle shift of the train beneath your boots, the faintest hiss from the steam valve, the way the air vibrates when the engine begins to pull. You're up before the whistle. The platform recedes behind you, melting into the gray as the train resumes its steady roll forward. You check the couplings again, your mallet striking the iron links with soft, rhythmic taps. The sound is good, deep, sturdy. You move on. Past the third-class carriage, past the galley where Sykes, as always, sips his dark brew with a grin too tired to fully bloom. 4-minute special? He asks. You nod, a small smile tugging at the edge of your mouth. Solid. There's a strange joy among conductors in these quiet victories, like picking up a fallen coin that no one else noticed. You both understand this, no words required. As you step into the next carriage, you pass by a small chalkboard pinned near the door, scribbled with the station list, whistle signals, and occasional side notes. Someone's written, almost as a joke, 3 minutes to dream. The handwriting is familiar. Probably the new lad who's been trying to master the 2-minute nap without yet falling into the dangerous depths. Victorian train conductors had a complicated relationship with clocks. The pocket watch was trusted, the station clocks were respected, but the wall clocks in the crew compartments were often wrong by a minute or two, warped by rattling vibrations or lazy maintenance. Yet no one seemed to care. Your pocket watch is the clock that matters. You flip it open again, the ticking steady, the glass faintly fogged by your breath. Each tick feels like a step further into the peculiar life you've claimed. A life of fragments. A life stitched together by naps, duty, and the rhythm of iron wheels. You lean briefly against the wall, letting the vibrations pass through your spine, letting your breathing slow just enough to keep your body balanced between wakefulness and the edge of surrender. Some conductors spoke of falling into railway time, a state where they no longer tracked hours like ordinary folk, but instead lived in station intervals and whistle signals.
Historians still argue whether this was a practical mindset or a quiet slipping of the mind into something more mechanical. You wonder at times if you're slowly becoming part of the train itself. The brass buttons on your coat clink softly as you shift your weight. Your gloves are worn smooth at the palms from years of gripping rails, door latches, pocket watches. You pass through the sleeping compartments again. The passengers stir slightly but do not wake. One snores softly, head tilted awkwardly against the window pane, mouth slightly agape. Another clutches a frayed paperback novel, its pages crumpled from restless handling. They trust you to stay awake, to glide them safely through the gray corridors of morning. You know this, but it no longer feels heavy. You glance once more at the watch. The next station is some time away, a long golden stretch where another nap waits for you, tucked into the folds of a relentlessly moving schedule. You trace your thumb along the cool brass, listening to the soft clicks of its heartbeat. The train hums on, the countryside blurring past in gentle green and silver streaks. The journey continues.
You step out onto the narrow platform between carriages, where the cold snaps at your cheeks and your breath unfurls in curling streams of silver. The wind here always bites sharper, a reminder that the Victorian railway never quite sealed itself against the elements. Your boots scuff against the iron grating as you steady yourself with one gloved hand on the brass railing. The couplings groan beneath your feet, their constant faithful grind like the heartbeat of the train. There's comfort in this space, dangerous though it may seem. The wind, the rattle, the rhythmic sway. It's here you feel most stitched into the train's body. Historians still argue whether conductors who favored this platform did so out of duty or quiet rebellion, sneaking a breath of clean air between cramped, smoky compartments. You take in the rolling countryside, softened by mist, the skeletal trees flickering past like gray ghosts. The train carves its way through the morning hush, a serpent of iron and steam threading between villages just beginning to wake. This is the conductor's lullaby, the world sliding by in watercolor blurs, the creak of the carriages, the low hum of the engine somewhere ahead. You step back inside, boots clicking on wood, your coat heavy with clinging damp. Sykes waits in the galley, predictably cradling his tin mug. He raises an eyebrow, smirking at your habit. You love that platform. It's the only place you look fully awake. You shrug, settling near him, the steam from his kettle softening the air. You both stand there in easy silence, listening to the small chorus of creaks and ticks that the train never seems to rest from. Victorian railway crews developed their own peculiar routines. Some sipped bracing coffee at every stop, others chewed mint leaves or rubbed camphor oil on their temples to stave off the creeping fog of exhaustion. One old conductor, they say, swore by a bizarre ritual, tapping his boot heel 3 times on the galley floor before each nap, convinced it helped him pocket the rest, as if storing it for later. Whether he actually gained any benefit is, naturally, still debated among historians. You've picked up small rituals of your own. You always fold your coat in the same way when using it as a pillow. You always knock twice, softly, on the bunk frame before lying down. You always count the first 3 ticks of your pocket watch aloud, almost under your breath. These small things keep you tethered. You make another pass through the third-class carriages. The passengers are quieter now, most lulled into a shallow doze. The baby in the front compartment finally sleeps, her tiny woolen cap slipping sideways over one ear. You move softly, careful not to wake them.
The wooden benches in third class offer little comfort. Many passengers sleep sitting upright, arms folded tightly, heads bobbing with the train's sway. Some lean against one another without realizing it, bodies seeking warmth and balance in the cold, rattling cradle of the carriage. Victorian railway companies rarely concern themselves with passenger comfort, particularly for the lower classes. Cushions were optional, heating was inconsistent. Yet people still slept because exhaustion always finds a way. Historians still argue whether these early long-distance trains fundamentally changed the way people slept. Did they invent the micro-nap culture we now chase in our modern age? Or were these fractured, jostling rests simply a natural response to necessity? You pause near a small window where the condensation has drawn slow, trailing lines. Someone earlier traced a name in the foggy glass, now half melted into a smudge. You press your gloved finger into the pane, the cold biting instantly, and absently draw a tiny clock face. Another conductor's quiet joke. Time is not just kept here, it's measured in naps, counted in the gaps between stations, folded carefully into the soft spaces behind mail crates. You drift back toward your bunk, that scratchy, straw-stuffed mattress that has somehow become a familiar friend. You settle in, blanket rough against your chin, coat folded beneath your head. Your pocket watch rests in your palm, its ticking warm and steady, as if it too has grown accustomed to these rhythms. Your breathing slows. The train rocks you gently, the lull of the rails wrapping around your ribs, lulling you toward the edge once more. You wonder if Wilkins ever really existed, the standing sleeper, the master of blinks. Perhaps he's not one man, but an amalgam, a stitched-together legend passed along the rails like a traveling song. Perhaps you, in your own way, are slowly becoming Wilkins. The thought makes you smile softly, your grip loosening around the brass watch. The nap comes quickly this time, not deep, but enough. Just enough. You rouse yourself, perfectly timed, as the next station's whistle begins to echo faintly in the distance. You rise, your joints stiff, but sure. The journey continues.
The next station appears like a ghost in the lifting fog. A squat brick building with peeling paint, the name board just legible enough to confirm you're precisely on schedule. Victorian stations often shared this humble appearance, especially in the countryside. Part home, part outpost, part skeletal suggestion that someone, somewhere, was waiting. Your boots tap softly as you step onto the platform, where a porter waits with a sleepy nod and a clipboard. The exchange of cargo is brisk, bundles of newspapers, crates of coal, parcels tied with rough twine. No fuss, no wasted words. You glance at your pocket watch. 3 minutes before departure. Perfect. Your hand curls instinctively around the warm brass, its ticking now as familiar to you as your own pulse. Victorian conductors were known for this symbiotic relationship with their watches. They didn't merely check them, they carried them like small golden hearts, synchronized to the rhythm of steel rails and hissing brakes. Historians still argue whether this deep connection to pocket watches bred an unusual sense of time among conductors. How they could, with eerie precision, estimate down to seconds without needing to glance at the dial. You tuck the watch back into your coat and step into the freight car for one more brief, carefully measured nap. A 2-minute pocket, enough to soften the edges. You slide into your favored wedge between crates, the familiar scent of hemp rope, paper, and cold steel settling around you like a well-worn blanket. Your breathing slows. The train vibrates beneath you, a deep, consistent lullaby. the iron wheels singing their quiet song. For 2 precious minutes, you float. You wake exactly as the engine shudders forward, the signal lamp swinging in lazy circles as the train departs. You move back through the passenger carriages, noting the quiet stirrings of the travelers, their faces slack with sleep or crumpled in the stiffness of the benches. There's a particular sound now, one you've come to love, a distant, rhythmic knocking, almost like a heartbeat trapped inside the rails. It's the sound of the train stretching itself awake after a stop, settling into its relentless glide. You lean briefly against the wall, letting the vibrations settle into your bones. You find Sykes near the galley, as always, his tin cup now nearly empty. You ever try to stack 'em? Stack what? The naps. 2 minute, then another 2, then another. See how deep you can go before the watch pulls you back. I smirk softly, rolling the brass chain between my fingers. Maybe I'm stacking them already. Victorian railwaymen had strange competitions, little games they played in the empty hours to keep their minds sharp and their bodies alert. Who could nap the fastest? Who could guess the next station's arrival time within 10 seconds? Who could predict a shift in the weather based solely on the creaks of the carriage walls? Historians still argue whether these games served any real purpose, or if they were simply a way to keep the creeping weight of exhaustion at bay. You walk slowly back toward the rear of the train, your steps balanced, your breathing even. The countryside glides past, opening now into rolling fields brushed with early morning gold. Crows scatter from the hedgerows as the engine's whistle slices through the dawn. Train feels alive beneath you, its breathing steady, its muscles flexing through rails and couplings. You pause briefly at your bunk, leaning your head against the wooden frame, listening to the syncopated rhythms that guide your life. The wheels, the ticking watch, the faint rattle of the mailbags shifting behind you. You remember Ellis, the conductor they called the blank ledger. He used to say the train became your pillow, your blanket, your dream. Perhaps you were finally beginning to understand him. You slip into another nap, 1 minute this time, deliberately shallow. Your body dips just enough to pull a soft, weightless image from your mind. A fluttering red scarf, a clock with no hands, a station that never quite comes into focus. You wake just before your pocket watch's silent countdown concludes, rising smoothly as the train glides through the countryside. You pass through the third-class carriage once more, glancing at the scribbled chalkboard near the door. Someone has added a new note. Every nap counts. You allow yourself a small, crooked smile. It's not a joke. It's the mantra of the conductors. You pass Sykes again as you approach the front car, his familiar, weary grin waiting for you. How deep did you go this time? I tap my watch gently. Stacked 2. Might go for 3 later. He raises his mug in mock salute. The train hums, the couplings groan, the journey rolls on, stitched together by fragments of rest and the ticking heartbeat in your pocket. You close your eyes briefly as you walk, perfectly balanced between sleep and duty, carried forward by iron and steam. The journey continues.
The morning sharpens around you as the train carves its way through fields, now fully visible in the soft gold of rising sunlight. The mist has burned away, but the air still clings to a stubborn chill that seeps through your gloves and curls around your collar. You make your way to the small cargo compartment, where sacks of grain and crates of mail sit in orderly rows. It's quiet here, save for the occasional clunk of shifting freight and the faint shiver of the iron wheels. Victorian railway conductors always knew which parts of the train offered the best silence. The corners where the vibrations smoothed out, where the rattle softened to a dull hum. These spots became sanctuaries, tucked between duty and drifting. You slide into your alcove,
wedging yourself against the wooden wall as your body prepares for another carefully rationed nap. There's an art to it now. You've honed it over countless journeys. 3 minutes. That's all you'll take. Your breathing slows. The train's rhythm seeps into your bones, the soft clatter folding itself around your ribs like a well-worn blanket. In this half-sleep, the scraps of a dream flicker again, a red scarf caught on a signal post, a brass pocket watch with its hands spinning backwards, a faint voice calling a station name you've never heard. Historians still argue whether Conductor's fragmented dreams were shaped by the motion, the schedules, the constant pull between rest and vigilance, or whether their dreams simply reflected a life forever divided into slices. You wake precisely as your pocket watch clicks over to the minute you'd aimed for. The timing is perfect. You rise, stretching the stiffness from your shoulders, the brass chain of your watch swinging gently as you walk. You pass Sykes in the galley once more. He raises an eyebrow without speaking, and you answer with a small nod. 3 minutes? You smirk. Stacked it. His grin deepens, both impressed and amused. Careful, you'll start dreaming in real time soon. Victorian conductors often joked about the danger of dreaming on the clock, slipping so deeply into rest that time itself would warp around you, making seconds feel like hours, or hours collapse into the blink of an eye. You step into the passenger carriages again, moving through the rows of third-class benches. The passengers remain in that soft, drifting state. Their heads tilted against window panes, their arms folded tightly across their chests. Their dreams stitched roughly together by the steady lull of the moving train. You watch a boy clutching a tin toy soldier, his head drooping in rhythm with the rails. A woman near the far window cradles a half-read book, its spine cracked from being opened too many times during the long journey. You catch yourself thinking that the passengers have it easy. They can surrender fully to the sleep that hovers around them. They have no duties, no brass watches binding their minutes. But perhaps they do not know the quiet pleasure of mastering time in this way. You glance at the chalkboard near the door again. Someone, probably the new lad, has added a fresh scribble. 5 minutes is the golden map. You almost laugh. Ambitious. Dangerous. The 5-minute nap is the white whale for Victorian conductors. Perfect in theory, terrifying in practice. Historians still argue whether any conductor reliably achieved the 5-minute nap without falling into the heavy depths of sleep that risked missing critical signals. You're tempted now, not out of pride, but curiosity. Could you? You find your bunk, the scratchy blanket familiar against your palm. You settle in, the pocket watch warm in your hand. 5 minutes. You close your eyes. The train carries you, rocking, humming, whispering through the endless countryside. The dream comes faster this time. The red scarf, the soundless bell, the station with no name, the voice just out of reach. Your breathing steadies. The grip on the watch remains loose but present. You wake just as the pocket watch clicks to the end of the 5th minute. Perfect. Your heart beats steadily, calm as if your body always knew you could do it. You rise smoothly, joints crackling softly, coat settling around your shoulders like a trusted companion. Sykes meets you near the coupling check. 5? You nod, the smallest smile curve at your mouth. 5. Dream? You pause, remembering the station with no name,
the backward spinning watch, the red scarf. Almost, you say quietly. The railway life has made you an expert in these almosts. You step back onto the platform between cars, letting the wind press against you, cold and bracing, sharp enough to remind you that you are still very much awake, still in motion. The train hums beneath you, the couplings singing their low, steady note as you tap them with your mallet. The rhythm is perfect, the timing is perfect. The journey continues. You remain on the platform between the carriages for a moment longer, the cold biting your cheeks as the countryside unfurls, rolling away in soft greens and browns beneath the rising sun. The iron railings are slick with dew, your glove creaking faintly as you tighten your grip. The rhythm of the wheels is as steady as your heartbeat now, no longer something you notice, but something you move with. Victorian conductors spoke of this feeling as locking in, a state where your body, the train, and time itself seem stitched together into a seamless glide. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine psychological shift or just a poetic excuse conductors offered when their sense of hours began to blur. You pull your pocket watch from your coat. The brass casing is warm from your touch, the chain swaying softly as the wind tugs at it. The hands point precisely where you expected. You flip it closed with a quiet click. Inside, the passengers stir. The baby still sleeps, cradled in the crook for mother's arm. The boy with the tin soldier now leans against his father's side, their heads tilted in almost identical angles. You pass through the carriages quietly, checking latches, oil lamps, the subtle creak of the carriage doors. Your boots know the soft spots in the floorboards by heart now, and you step over them without thinking. The chalkboard near the door catches your eye once more. The new lad has scribbled again. 5 is good. 6 is brave. You raise your eyebrows, amusement warming your chest. Victorian conductors, it seems, never quite resist pushing the edge. You find Sykes leaning near his kettle, spinning his tin cup between his hands. You'll see the board? You ask. He grins, eyes glinting. Lad's got ambition. You murmur. 6 minutes is a long time. He sips his coffee. Long enough to dream a lifetime. You both know it's not a dare, not exactly, but you can feel the idea settling into your bones, like the weight of your coat. 6 minutes. A nap that edges toward danger, long enough for your body to surrender, but not quite long enough for the deep hooks of heavy sleep to drag you under. Historians still argue whether the elusive 6-minute nap was ever safely mastered, or if it was simply a whispered legend among railwaymen who spent their careers balancing on the thinnest edge of exhaustion. You trace the brass chain of your watch between your thumb and forefinger. Perhaps it's time to find out. You retreat to your usual corner behind the crates, where the soft shuffle of mail sacks and the faint scent of oil-soaked wood feel like home. You settle into the familiar shape of the nap, breathing slow, body loose but not limp. You set the watch in your palm. 6 minutes. Your breathing deepens, your body slipping along the familiar rails of rest. The dream comes quickly this time. The station with no name. The red scarf, caught forever in a breeze that never blows. The pocket watch, its hands now spinning impossibly fast, as though the minutes are trying to escape. A faint bell tolls in the distance, soundless, but steady. You feel yourself moving through the dream, not trapped in it, but walking alongside it, balanced carefully. You breathe out, sinking deeper. You hear somewhere beyond the fog of the dream the faint ticking of your watch. Even here, in this constructed world of steam and velvet shadows, you can feel its weight in your palm. You awake exactly as the watch clicks over to the 6th minute. Perfect. You rise slowly, the weight of the nap still soft around your shoulders. You move through the carriages, pausing briefly at the chalkboard. You chalk a single line beneath the lad's last message. Just a mark. A quiet signature. Sykes meets you near the freight door, one eyebrow raised. 6? You nod. And? Still here? He huffs a laugh. Barely. Victorian conductors lived for these strange milestones. Not promotions, not medals, but these private triumphs. Perfectly timed naps, flawless handovers, the quiet mastery of their own bodies in defiance of the brutal schedules. You step once more onto the windswept platform between the carriages, the countryside flashing by, the scent of coal smoke shark in your nose. You glance at your watch again. The hands march on, indifferent, steady. The train hums beneath you. You lean against the railing, letting the cold settle into your gloves, your coat, the small space behind your ribs, where rest lingers like a shadow.
The countryside rolls past in long, uninterrupted sweeps, the fields stitched together by crooked hedgerows and low stone walls. The train seems to glide more smoothly now, the vibrations a soft purr beneath your boots. You've come to know this stretch of the journey. It's the longest, uninterrupted segment between stations. Victorian conductors called it the Velvet Run, a rare gift of nearly 40 minutes without mandatory stops, signals, or passenger demands. It is, in the railwayman's world, the crown jewel of nap opportunities. You run your hand along the cool brass of your pocket watch, considering the weight of this stretch. It's long enough to risk a full, proper sleep, the kind of sleep most conductors never allow themselves while on duty. Victorian conductors fiercely debated the ethics of these longer naps. Some insisted they were necessary, that mastery of the micro-nap was precisely what made them the best men for the job. Others warned that dipping too deep, even once, could fray the thread of discipline they so carefully stitched into themselves. Historians still argue whether any Victorian conductor routinely took long naps without consequence, or if the tales of Velvet Run sleepers are simply the stuff of railway folklore. You consider it now. You feel the ache in your shoulders, the quiet pull behind your eyes, the weight of all those stacked naps, precisely measured and carefully rationed. Perhaps this stretch is meant for you. You find your bunk, settle your coat into its familiar fold beneath your head, and cradle the pocket watch in your palm. You close your eyes. The train's lullaby rises around you. Steel on steel, wind against window, the soft, predictable shuffle of the rails. You breathe slowly, letting the rhythms carry you. The dream blooms immediately. You're walking along a platform that never ends, the red scarf fluttering ahead of you, always just out of reach. The bell swings gently above a station door, its clopper silent, its purpose forgotten. You pass a timetable posted on the wall, every arrival and departure listed as now. The pocket watch in your hand is still ticking, but the hands spin in both directions at once. You are both standing and walking, both sleeping and awake. The station with no name waits for you in the distance, a blur that never sharpens. Somewhere, you hear the soft knock of a mallet against couplings. A voice, Sykes perhaps, calls your name from far down the platform. You turn, but he's already vanished. The dream deepens. You feel the softness of the bunk, the scratch of the wool blanket, the faint creak of the mail sacks settling nearby. Your body holds on to these anchor points, careful not to fully surrender. Victorian conductors spoke of this edge, this shimmering balance between rest and duty, as riding the rail of sleep. It is a dangerous, beautiful place to be. You stir, your fingers tightening around the brass chain. The watch clicks softly. You open your eyes, perfectly timed. No alarms, no startle, just the natural rising back to the surface. You swing your legs off the bunk, your boots thudding lightly against the floor. The Velvet Run nap conquered. You move through the carriages, the passengers still resting in their soft clusters, the baby's breathing even, the boy's tin soldier now resting on the seat beside him. You pass the chalkboard. The new lad has left one last scribble. 7 is legend. You trace the chalk gently with your thumb, smudging the edges, a small grin tugging at the corner of your mouth. Perhaps 7 is for another journey. You meet Sykes near the galley, where the kettle steams lazily. He glances at you with knowing eyes. Velvet run? You nod, voice quiet, steady, smooth as clockwork. His grin flickers, then softens. You'll tell the lad? You consider it. Maybe. Or maybe I'll let him find it on his own. Victorian conductors believed some lessons had to be earned. Some naps, some rhythms could not be taught. The train hums steadily, the couplings singing their low, perfect note as you tap them during your final round. The countryside has fully awakened now. Sheep graze in pale green fields, the church spires rise clean and sharp against the sky, and distant plumes of smoke curl lazily from stone chimneys. The rhythm of duty pulls you forward, but your body moves with an ease you've earned. The watch ticks steadily in your pocket, its weight familiar, its chain swinging gently as you walk. The journey continues. Your breathing slows, your steps soften. The train, the watch, the rails, all of it hums in perfect time, guiding you gently toward the end of this long, careful night. You step onto the platform between carriages once more, the wind pressing against your coat, the cold familiar now, almost welcome. Countryside stretches out before you. You close your eyes, just for a moment, letting the rhythm carry you. The journey continues.
The train glides onward now, steady and smooth, as the countryside begins to slow, the edges softening like the corners of a well-worn blanket. Your breathing deepens, the hum of the rails folding around you like a quiet heartbeat. The weight of your pocket watch in your palm is no longer a countdown. It's a comfort, a rhythm, a soft tether that gently keeps you grounded. You let your steps slow, moving through the carriages with unhurried ease, the creaks and groans of the train settling into a lull that's neither loud nor urgent. The baby sleeps. The boy's tin soldier rests quietly on the bench. The countryside blurs into long, smooth strokes of green and gray, the morning mist now fully lifted, the sharp edges of the world softened. You lean against the wooden wall of the carriage, your breath slowing, your shoulders easing as the final stretches of the journey unfold around you. The couplings continue their gentle song. The distant whistle fades into the background. The rhythm of the rails becomes quieter, less insistent, more like the soft pulse of a dream you're just beginning to drift toward. You rest your head against the wood, the vibrations low and steady, almost like the breathing of something familiar, something safe. The pocket watch ticks on, unbothered, unhurried. The journey continues. And maybe, just maybe, it can carry you a little longer. Let the sound of the train guide you now. Let the hum of the rails carry you forward. You can let go. You can rest. The journey will continue. Sweet dreams.